Good morning, class. I'm going to be talking to you about Parmenides, and he is another pre-Socratic philosopher that you're going to encounter in the first chapter of your book, Looking at Philosophy. Parmenides was a Greek philosopher, but not from the mainland of Greece. He was from actually southern Italy in this place called Elea. It's kind of like right in the boot tip of the peninsula of Italy, the very bottom part. There looks like a heel of a boot. Anyway, that's where he's from, Elea. But he was kind of like operating under a Greek colony, just like Thales was from the little city, seaside city of Miletus in Asia Minor. Anyway, Parmenides was a very strange philosopher, and I'm kind of tasked to explain him to you, because if you get into the book, you'll end up reading something like this, and I'll transcribe it so that you can actually see his words. But if you've been reading and you come into this guy's, when you get into the book and you'll see something like this, you go, I'm not sure if I understand that. And of course, your first year philosophy students, most of you will never go on and take other philosophy classes. So you read something like what's in the book here and you go, huh? So let me break it down for you, and let's see if we can explain this very strange, enigmatic philosopher. So Parmenides begins with what he takes to be a self-evident truth. I'm reading from page 32. Parmenides begins with what he takes to be a self-evident truth. Quote, "It is." This claim is not empirical, not derived from observation. Rather, it is a truth of reason. It cannot even be denied without self-contradiction. If you say it is not, i.e., nothing exists, then you've proved that it is. For if nothing exists, it is not nothing. Rather, it is something that exists. I'll keep reading, but notice how he's talking about stuff that's just kind of hard to grasp. Parmenides believed that being is rational, that only what can be thought can exist. Since nothing cannot be thought without thinking of it as something, there is no nothing. There is only being. From the mere idea of being, it follows that being is uncreated. If it were created, it would have been created from nothing. But there is no nothing. Indestructible. If being were destructible, it could turn into non-being, but there is no non-being. Being is eternal. If it were not eternal, then it would eventually become non-being, which is impossible, and indivisible. If it could be divided, there would be spaces of non-being between its parts. But there is no non-being. Furthermore, being is spherical, because only a sphere is equally real in all directions. Maybe this notion is related to the idea of the 20th century physicist Albert Einstein, who claimed that space is curved? ? Being has no holes, no vacuum, because if being is, there can't be any place where being is not. From this argument, it follows that motion is impossible, because motion would involve being going from where being is to where being isn't. But there can't be any place such as the place where being isn't. In fact, for Parmenides, the very idea of empty space was an impossible idea. Either space is a thing, in which case it is something and not nothing, or it is nothing, in which case it does not exist, because all thought must have an object. And because nothing is not an object, the idea of nothing is a self-contradictory idea. Well, if you read that as a first-time beginning philosophy student, you can see how you're going to be confused. So that's where I've got to come into the mix here a little bit and try to help you explain what this guy's saying. So first of all, let's kind of break down his ideas by saying that for Parmenides, all of being is one thing. Now, that's kind of an unusual claim, because you and I would tend to think that being is multiple. Being is plural. There are, for instance, if you just look at what you're looking through the camera, there are glasses, there are people, there are shirts, there are wedding bands, there are coffee tables in the back, there's a painting, there are curtains, there are walls, a mirror. Outside this room, there is a canyon. I have here in front of me a phone. There is a book. So when you're saying being is one, that kind of collides with our senses because we'll say, no, being is multiple. There's many, many things. There's human beings, but there's also a mouse being. Now you might tend to think, how is a mouse, a computer mouse, a being? Well, it's a separate entity. It's a separate substance from me. That's what I mean by being is many. But that's not what Parmenides is saying. Being is one. Being is all of one thing, which is kind of weird because we tend to think of being as multiple. You have family members in your house. They are not you. They're your brothers and sisters and your family members. So there are many beings, multiple beings. And Parmenides is saying being is one. So let me see if I can give you an image to try to encapsulate what he's saying. I want you to think of, I don't know if you guys are a generation that would relate to this concept, but think of Jell-O. And, I'm not sure if you can think of Jell-O, but I'm sure you've heard of the concept Jell-O. And think of a bunch of different fruit inside the Jell-O that is allowed to chill. So inside the Jell-O mold, you have, let's say, a little mandarin orange, you have a marshmallow. You'll sometimes see this as at a potluck where somebody will bring this little bowl of Jell-O. You kind of shake it, it goes Jell-O. And inside there's these little items in the Jell-O. There could be fruit, a little peach, a sliver of a banana, a grape, and it's all caught, if you will. It's all suspended because the Jell-O eventually gets chilled and all of those little objects in the Jell-O are kind of frozen in place. So think of the Jell-O mold as being, all of being, which is the universe. And if you'll notice that the Jell-O is connecting all of the things inside the Jell-O. For instance, the Jell-O, when you pour the Jell-O on top of all these items that you're putting into the Jell-O, like a little nut or a marshmallow or a peach or a mandarin orange or a grape or whatever you put in your Jell-O mold. Notice how the Jell-O kind of encompasses all of those things and kind of surrounds them. Well, that's what Parmenides means by being. Being connects every single being within it. So there's no place where being is not present because the Jell-O has completely filled in all the spaces of the individual things inside the Jell-O mold. In other words, it's touching the marshmallow, it's touching the grape, it's touching the little walnut chunk, it's touching the peach piece, the banana sliver, the mandarin orange slice. It's touching everything. It's connecting everything because being is all one thing. So I don't know if it's a good image, but I'm trying to get you to think of the Jell-O mold being the universe and everything is connected. So let me put it to you maybe a slightly different way. If you've ever seen a Google map, and if you toggle away, first you're in Chula Vista or Bonita, and then all of a sudden you go and you can start see the Baja California and you can see Pacific Ocean. And if you keep toggling and you get this macro view, eventually you can kind of see the globe. And when you see planet Earth, you're not seeing all the multiple things on planet Earth. You're just seeing the globe. We'll keep toggling out until you just see the entire universe and you'll say, well, all of the universe is one thing. There seems to be a lot of different stars and black holes and galaxies and suns and planets and asteroids and meters, but all of that is encompassed in the one universe, which looks like it's a bunch of multiple things, but it's really one thing. So try to get your mind wrapped around the idea that Parmenides is very literal when he says that all being is one thing. So when you open up, if I left this room and I opened up the door to my room and I went outside into another room, you might say, well, I'm in another room. No, I'm still within the one house. Well, what if I went out the front door of my house? I'm still within the one planet. And here's another weird thing. If I see a bird or a crow flying overhead, you might tend to think, well, that's a different being. And Parmenides is saying, no, the jello of being is connecting everything into one solid being. Now, I'm hoping that I'm trying to, give you some concept or some kind of access into this very strange idea. Okay, so that's one thing. Being is one. There is no place where being is not. For instance, if you were taking a road trip, you couldn't say, you know what, I'm going to drive to the state of non-being. How could you do that? There is no state. There's the 48 states that you could drive to in North America. You can't drive to, obviously, Alaska. Well, you could drive to Alaska. You can't drive to Hawaii. So you could drive to the 49 states, in the Western and the Northern Hemisphere. But you can't drive to a state of non-being. Why? Because there's only being. There's only the state of being where all of us are in one reality or one being. Okay. So that's one idea to kind of keep in mind. Being is all one. You can't divide it. You can't chop it, because like if you took a slice of this room and tried to divide it and then tried to separate being, it would be like water pouring in. I don't know if you've ever had a glass of water. You stick your hands into the water and try to separate it. The water just immediately closes in, because being is the water is like being. It's everywhere. Okay, maybe that's not a good image, but hopefully you're keeping in mind that being is all of one. And here's this other weird idea. If you were mentioning to Parmenides, hey, I'm going to fly to New York City, Parmenides would say, how can you fly to New York City? You are New York City, 3,000 miles away from this particular place that you're in right now, which is Spring Valley or Chula Vista or Bonita, wherever you happen to be right now. If you said, I'm going to New York, he would say, well, what do you call all the space between where you are in the South Bay and New York City? All of that is being, and you're still connected to everything by being, by the air surface all around you is still being. This is not emptiness. This stuff that you see around me, this emptiness that you say between me and the wall behind me, that's full of being. Now, I know what you're thinking. You tend to think, but this space allows me to be this being within this space that has many different kinds of beings. And Parmenides is saying, no, it's all one jello mold. Now, I can walk around in my jello mold, but I'm still in the one jello mold of being. Space is like the jello. This space, this air, is like the jello that I'm walking in. But it's still just one jello mold, and it extends into the entire universe. Everything is one being. All right, so that's kind of weird. So he would say you can't really go to some new place because you are that place already. Your body doesn't just extend. It doesn't just occupy this one little space between this ear and this ear. It goes out. So you are all connected by being. And the other weird thing is that you might say, well, you are different than me. You're listening to my words, but you're saying, I'm not you. How can we be one being? You, Orozco, are speaking thoughts, and I have my own thoughts. So how could you and I be one being if I don't know what the hell you're talking about? But think about that. Think about inside your own body, you have nerve cells, you have bone cells, you have blood cells, you have white blood cells, you have all kinds of cells in your body that don't look like each other. A bone cell doesn't look like a nerve cell. There's differences, but it's still one body. And your nose doesn't look like your ear, and your eye doesn't look like your elbow, but it's all one body, and your body doesn't end where your physical body seems to end. Your body extends out into being, and we're all just one being. It's a very strange concept. And I don't have to know what you're thinking, because your nerve cell might not know what your blood cell is doing or your bone cell, but it's all functioning perfectly in the one being of your body. So your body is extended throughout all of the universe. It's just really weird. So who thinks like this? Who thinks like this? So Parmenides, gosh, what's going on with him? Okay, and let me give you one other concept to try to keep in mind, because you're either going to get a feel for this guy or you won't. But another concept of Parmenides is that there is no such thing as change. Change is an illusion, because something cannot come from nothing. There's only being, so change cannot occur. When we see something changing, it's an illusion to the senses. It's an illusion to the senses. It's like when you go to Vegas and somebody makes something disappear, like when you see David Copperfield or Chris Angel or David Blaine or one of these great magicians in Vegas. You know something's going on there, but it's just an illusion. And Parmenides would say, when you see something changing, it is also an illusion. It's not really happening. So let me see if I can try to explain that. And I brought in a little prop. You'll know that, I bring in certain things for you to kind of see, like the last class, a couple of classes ago, I had you look at these four different, the four elements. Okay, so look at this wood. Now, you and I would probably all agree that in a couple of hours, if I could get a flame going, boom, and I was actually burning this wood for a while, and I could hold this flame in my hand, I could burn this wood. You can see how it already got a little charcoal stain right there. If I had enough time and I could hold this finger and I can get this place, eventually set it down. It's pine. It's not a very hard wood, and it's nice and dry. You and I understand, because we've been on planet Earth and we have eyes and we have experiences, that you and I could burn this piece of wood and eventually turn it into a bunch of ashes, right? That's common sense, Earth, common sense. Parmenides is saying, no, what you would be watching with this log, let's say with flames coming out of this log and smoke coming out of this log, what you would be watching, according to Parmenides, is an illusion. It's not changing. This log will not change, even though it seems like it's changing. Now, once again, you're going, I go to Coronado to the fire pits, and and I've watched a lot of logs burn over in my years in a chimney, and I see a lot of ashes. This dude seems to be crazy. So let's go into what he means, because this guy, Parmenides, is called a rationalist. There are some people that are called empiricists. You've heard of these words before. An empiricist is somebody who has to see it, sense it, and experience it in order to quantify it. Most scientists are empiricists. But this guy in philosophy is actually called a rationalist. And a rationalist is someone who will believe in mental arguments over physical arguments. In other words, if it's true to reason, then even if it seems like it's true to your eyes, a rationalist will always pick the truth of reason rather than the truth of the senses, hearing, smelling. So does that make sense to you? An empiricist trusts the senses. A rationalist would say, sure, I know that there are senses, but if I had to make a choice between something that is proved to me logically and something that's proved to me by the senses, a rationalist will always take the logical argument. Let me give you a quick example. If it's getting hot now, right, in the summertime, and if you were driving out on Highway 8 and you started getting to, over the mountain and you started dropping down into Calexico Valley, going into Mexicali, my wife is from there. If you were going out there, you start to notice when the road starts to get about 110, 115 degrees, the road kind of looks like it's shimmering and it's wet and there's water on top of the road. Now, is that really happening? No, that's just heat optics that are messing with your senses. So would you rather trust the senses to tell you that there's water there, or will your brain tell you, no, that's something that's not really happening? I have to trust that my eyes are not telling me the truth. There's something that's deceiving my senses. Well, a rationalist will always believe in the rational scientific explanation but not the empirical explanation. So let's go back to Parmenides for a second. So this log, even though it looks like it's burning, right? We've got the flame going, right? It looks like it's going to burn. But he'll say even 2 hours later, when you look at the ashes, that's an illusion to your senses. You're looking at like a freeway that looks like water, but it's not really happening. So even when you're looking at the ashes, Parmenides would say you're looking at an illusion. Now, at this point, you should be saying, this dude is tripping. I can't accept what he's saying. So let's try to figure out why this dude is so stuck on this rationalist interpretation of what's going on. Okay, so here's what Parmenides would say. For the ashes, okay, for instance, let's just go ahead and say that at 1 o'clock, it was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon that I started burning this log at 1 o'clock. I lit my flame. Let's call that time 1, T1, if we were doing an experiment. T1 equals 1 o'clock. Orozco started the burn of this log. Right at that moment, when you started the fire, Parmenides would ask, okay, stop the experiment right there. Can you show me ashes right now? As soon as that fire kind of went like this, let's imagine this is going in slow motion, right? Now you notice how the fire just kind of went, and let's just imagine that just before this flame reached this log, just before it reached it, Parmenides would say, okay, stop the experiment right at that moment. And he would ask you, can you produce any ashes right now at 1 o'clock? Right exactly at 1 o'clock when you started the burn, can you produce, show with in your palm of your hand, a pile of ashes to Parmenides? Can you do that right at 1 o'clock? And of course you would say, well, no, I can't do that right now. Give me an hour and I'll give you all the ashes that you want. But that's not, Parmenides is kind of a lawyer here. You ever notice he'll say, don't give me any further explanations. Just answer yes or no. This is Parmenides, the rationalist lawyer. He's going to ask you, okay, right at the moment that you started to burn this log, can you produce any ashes? And of course your answer was, well, no, I can't produce any ashes. But, and he'll say, no, stop. Can you produce any ashes right now at 1 o'clock? And you go, well, no, I can't. So he would, the next question, Parmenides, the rationalist lawyer, would ask you is, then where are the ashes? Are they, because you only have two options, they are either in being or non-being. Now, if they're in being, if they are in a state of being, you should be able to produce them to him. You should be able to show him the ashes. If they are in being, you should be able to say, well, here they are. Well, in fact, you can say, well, no, they're kind of in a state of non-being because I can't show them to you at 1 o'clock. If you're asking, where are they? Well, what if I cut the log open with a saw? Would there be ashes hidden inside there? Like jelly inside of a jelly donut when you break the jelly donut? You say, hey, there's the jelly inside. No, even if you cut this log in half right at 1 o'clock, would you see any ashes there? No, you would get sawdust, but sawdust would just be the chipping or the little flakes of the log. That's not burned ashes. So can you produce the ashes at 1 o'clock? And you would say, well, no, I can't show you any ashes because they haven't been produced yet. So then his next question will be, well, then where are the ashes right now at 1 o'clock? You'd have to say, well, they're not in the state of being right now. Now notice what you just said. You said they are in a state of non-being right now. Because I can't, if they were in a state of being, this phone is in a state of being and I can show it to you. But where are the ashes at 1 o'clock? Well, they're not in being yet. And he would say, well, if they are in a state of non-being, how could you ever get something from a state of non-being? Now listen to the question again. Can you pull something out of nothing? This is a serious question because, for instance, if you don't have a bank account, can you take any money out of that bank account? Well, no, because you can't take something out of nothing. So if the ashes are in a state of non-being at 1 o'clock, how can you pull something out of non-being? Remember, Parmenides has got this very strict interpretation of what being is. In the very beginning of the book, in the very beginning of this chapter, he says, Parmenides begins with what he takes to be a self-evident truth. It is. In other words, Parmenides thinks everything is just jello. Whatever is here in being. And whatever is not here right now, like the ashes, it is in a state of non-being. But non-being doesn't exist. So those ashes cannot come into being, because if they were in a state of non-being, they could not come into being. And similarly, in 2 hours or 1 hour after being burned, after steady burning of this log cannot go into non-being, because does non-being exist? For Parmenides, does non-being exist? No, there's only being, which is here right now, and there's only what's here right now is in being. So the future is not here, because it's not here right now. The past is not here. There's only being right now. So here's where Parmenides is really weird, and you have to think, how the hell did this guy get so famous? Because you would think, listen, how did I get to be this adult who's speaking to you? And how did you get to be the college student who's listening to me? At one point, you were a baby. So where did that come from? There had to have been a past, and you had to have gone through your baby pictures, and you had to go through your grammar school pictures and your high school pictures, and now you have your California CDL, your California driver's license. You've changed over time. So Parmenides, how about that? You're telling him, how did I change? That I changed over time, just like this log will change over time. And Parmenides is so weird that he's saying, no, if it's not here in being right now, then it doesn't exist. And he'll say, if you tell him, yes, it does, we can see that things change. And he'll go, well, if you can't prove to me that something is if you can't demonstrate that something's in being right now, he says that it's an illusion. Okay, so I can't, go into, whether I like this guy. Imagine people thinking things like this, I think he was born like at around 515 BCE. Imagine people thinking on this level 500 years before the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. I mean, remember, these are very primitive times. I mean, people are stonemasons and they're carpenters. They don't know about cement. They don't know about antibiotics. They don't know about electricity. They don't know about gravity. They don't know about molecules. They don't know about, what a rainbow is. They don't know about the aurora borealis. They don't know any of these concepts of modern science. And yet they're thinking about on the level of metaphysics and being, and asking about being and non-being. And for Parmenides, there's only being, because non-being, I can think about it as a concept. I can think about the concept of non-being. Right? I can think of my non-being bank account, the one I don't have. I can think about a non-being bank account, but that doesn't mean it exists. It exists as a concept, but it doesn't exist in reality. Only being exists in reality. Okay, so I'm really totally confused here. He confused a lot of philosophers for a long time ago. How do we even deal with this person who thinks that there's no present? Well, there's a present, but there's no past, no future. There's only being, where obviously I came from a mother and my father died. How do you explain these things? And he's going, I don't know how you can explain them, but they make no logical sense. Only being is right now. Aristotle, about a century and a half later, looked at this problem and he goes, the mistake that Parmenides was making is that in between the two concepts of being and non-being, there's this something in the middle called being in potency, which is really weird. In other words, what Aristotle was saying is that you can't just say that there's two things, being and non-being, because there's something called potential. So think about this. I have the potential to stand up right now and get out of my chair. But right now I'm sitting in my chair. But do you and I But do you understand the concept of potential? Potential means it may come into being, but right now it's not in being. So it's weird because being is not either in being or not in being. There's a part of being which doesn't look like it exists yet, but it's the possibility of being. Weird concepts, right? Because what Parmenides was forgetting, what he didn't analyze, is that being is not like a snapshot, like a photo, which captures one scene, one frame, and then that's it. Being is a series of snapshots, past, present, future, continuously going, including the possibility that in 2 minutes from now, when I finish this lecture, I could stand up. But can you see me standing up right now? No. But we're talking about being in potency, the possibility of being, which exists within the act of being, but it's almost like non-being. Think about that. It's really, really a weird concept that Aristotle came up with, that in between the two opposites of being and non, I always get mixed up when I look at the camera because it's reversed. Between the two opposite poles of being and non-being, there is something called being in potency. Being in potency, which means that there is a quality or aspect of being which has not come into being, but yet it is a quality of being, the to-be-ness of the act of being, the beingness of the act of being. So let me be quiet here for a second. And you'll notice that even when being looks like it's frozen, there's the possibility that being can evolve. Because within the concept of being is the possibility of being, the beingness of being. We're on strict metaphysics here, and this stuff gets wonky. Some of you like discussions like this. Some of you don't. It's just a introductory philosophy class. But I'm always amazed that people are this wonky, this weird, this metaphysical at this early point in human history. And there's thought like this going on not just in Western philosophy, like in Greece. There's thoughts about Dharma and Ahimsa and Brahma and Atman over in the Middle Eastern world, where where the Brahmin religion and Hinduism and the Upanishads are all thinking about these concepts. And then there's these dualistic concepts that you see in the Asian world with yin and yang, the evolving of being, which is the Tao, which also has a concept of nothingness. The Tao has being, but also non-being within it, which is just weird. So, right around 500 and 600 years before the time of Jesus of Nazareth, in little parts of the world, in Asia and in the Middle East and in Greece, there are these little pockets of metaphysical thought going on. What the hell was what were people drinking in the water at around 500 to 600 years before Christ? Before Jesus of Nazareth, before this, there's obviously mythological thinking, the gods, the deities, the forces of nature, animal gods, moon gods, river gods, rock gods, tree gods. There's all of those mythological speculations. But now people are getting to a deeper level of philosophical analysis about matter and being. Okay, enough on Parmenides. Out.